I've got a podcast I'm recording later tonight, so that's probably why I said that. Um, I just wanted to get on here before my podcast tonight. I just wanted to talk a little bit about sort of what's going on, what my schedule is going to be like in the coming weeks, and hopefully hopefully I will be able to get on a regular schedule here in the near future. It just kind of depends on what my schedule is at work. Work is so far going fairly well, and it's starting to pick up more. You can definitely tell that people are more interested in coming to the movies, more uh, hopeful about coming back to movies. I mean, it helps that you have movies like The Conjuring and Quiet Place 2 that are bringing people in, and I think that's good to have movies like that in the Heights. I'm very curious to see how that's going to do. I think we'll do fairly well with it, and for those of you who don't know where my work is available, it's at sonic-cinema.com or at the Sonic Cinema Podcast YouTube channel or at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify for podcasts for the Sonic Cinema Podcast. I'm also on Patreon at patreon.com/Sonic Cinema, and hope to get some more content for you over there. This month might be a bit light, unfortunately. I'm the time to watch movies has been it has not been as much as it used to be, partially because of the fact that we're doing a lot of work over at my mom's house now that she's in assisted living, which I talked about a few weeks ago. And basically, what's going on with there is we're basically going over everything, seeing what's going to come back to my wife's and mine house, what is going to be garage sale slash Goodwill, and stuff that is just going to be to other people, friends, family, what have you. And that's been it's definitely been a process. We've done 3 days over there so far. We've actually gotten quite a bit done, considering compared to how the house looks. There's been a lot of stuff over at the house, but that's another story for another day. It's been fun to look back at some of the stuff that we've found both at my in my room as well as just in general, all of the different movies stuff. Some of it we're keeping, some of it I'm keeping at least. Some of it's gonna just go towards Goodwill because I don't really feel like having it anymore. I forgot there was like this matted sort of commemorative, not really a painting, but at least something about the Crow Save Angels, which I was kind of obsessed for before it came out because I love the Alex Proyas film, and it was my favorite movie at the time. But and I was obsessed with the Crow Save Angels. It was sort of like the way the way Star Wars and other genre films are and other genre franchises are for some people. I was about the Crow, and I was about the Crow Save Angels, and it was one of those things where I even got the novelization, which I think is a tremendously good novelization. Shows a lot of potential that just isn't there in the movie. But yeah, something like that, I'm not really going to hang on to just because of the fact that that movie doesn't quite mean the same thing to me as it used to. And even at the time, I actually thought it was a fairly decent movie. I mean, I've seen it several times in the intervening years, and my opinion of it has gone down because it's very clearly just what we see is very clearly aping what the original film did, but not as well, with not as interesting lead in Vincent Perez as Ash. which is a shame because the novelization does actually point to an ending that I think would have been more interesting and maybe could have justified the existence of the sequel for Crow Save Angels. I mean, I will say the Crow Save Angels still is a phenomenal soundtrack. There's a great soundtrack for that movie, and it's one of those movies that I really enjoyed and at the time, but as I've grown older, as I've come to understand film and sort of see what film is truly capable of, I've kind of my opinion of it has kind of gone down, and that's just the natural tendencies of being a movie buff, and that's kind of when you're watching movies. That's all the time. That's kind of just how it goes. As far as rewatching stuff and trying to experience it. That actually brings me to one of the topics that I wanted to do tonight, and we're coming up in the summer months. We're technically 2 months into the summer movie season, although I think this year you could genuinely say that the summer movie year kind of did kick off with Memorial Day and A Quiet Place 2 and Cruella. And I wanted to talk about the summer of 1996, which, if you've read Sonic Cinema early in the year, I've been talking a lot about 1996. It was a formative year for me, not just because I graduated from high school, but also and started college, but it's also when I really started to essentially watch as much as I could. And I've never. I think like last year was one of the few years where I genuinely watched so many more movies than I watched over 400 movies from 2020. In 1996, I think it was around 140 is what I got to. And that was up until a couple of years ago, that was kind of where I plateaued out. The summer of 1996 is probably one of my favorite movie summers of all time. There are a lot of really interesting. Well, okay, there's not a lot of really interesting blockbusters. There's a lot of good blockbusters. I wouldn't say most of them are interesting. Any of them are really interesting from a quality standpoint, except maybe Brian De Palma's Mission Impossible, which is funny because of the fact that I watched that. My mom and I watched that one for the first time, and we were perplexed by it. We just could not make heads or tails around it, and it was just one of those things where, but over time we gradually came to enjoy it, and the fact that it's still going on 25 years later, you never would pick that up from the start of that series, but it's endured because of the fact that it's taken a lot of left turns. It's I think the fact that it went to different filmmakers at the start was a good thing for that franchise, and the fact that Tom Cruise just has continued to try to finesse what that series is supposed to be in terms of ensemble versus an Ethan Hunt movie, and it's not James Bond. It's a different thing. Ethan Hunt is certainly in the main role, but you really need an ensemble for that series to really work. And and so Mission Impossible, which I think is playing Fathom Events this year for 25th anniversary, for its 25th anniversary, I would love to try to see that movie again. I don't know if I get to one of those Fathom events, but it's certainly a movie that age has been very kind to it, and it's an example of a series that has been really well quality controlled, except for the John Woo one, which is absurd. As much as I love John Woo, I can't really I can't really say too much good about that one, except sort of like Crow Save Angels, it has a really good score to it. But you had Mission Impossible, Twister, which my mom and I first saw at the Atlanta premiere at the Fox Theater, And if you've never seen a movie at the Fox Theater in Atlanta or in any type of theater like that, I encourage you to take the chance to do so if the opportunity arises to see it in that type of theater experience, because it is absolutely wonderful. And that's always been one of my favorite experiences watching a movie, was seeing Twister at the Fox Theater. And Independence Day was a movie that I saw a ton over the over the summer. And it's funny because of given how much I saw it. I was also doing the Atlanta Olympic Band at the time. I was a member of the Atlanta Olympic Band during the '96 Olympics, and was performed at the opening and closing ceremonies. And it was a brutal it was brutal from a practice standpoint, but was still a lot of fun to do. It's an experience I'll never forget. And one of my favorite memories is when a bunch of us who went to Lassiter, who were in the Olympic band, after band practice one night, we all went up to the AMC Cobb Place 8, which is now Hobbytown, since the AMC Bear Commons opened up there. And we all went to go see Independence Day after band camp one night, and it was wonderful. It was amazing experience. It was a great experience. It's one of my this summer really had a lot of my favorite movie watching experiences. I mean, I think that's part of the reason I hold in such high regard as just a really fun movie summer. I mean, Twister at the Fox Theater was great. Independence Day after band practice was one that I will never forget. Also, yesterday was the 25th anniversary of The Rock being released, Michael Bay's best film, and I went to go see that opening day with my mother and my grandfather, who was down for my high school graduation, and our graduation was that night. So not only was it the 25th anniversary of The Rock being released and me seeing it for the first time, and that's another one that I saw multiple times. All of those movies I saw multiple times. This is when I really went whole hog into repeat viewings as well. But it's also the day I graduated high school officially, and that was a wonderful experience to have. I haven't seen The Nutty Professor, if we're going into comedies from the summer, in 25 years. I wasn't a fan of it. I wasn't a big fan of the movie. I'm curious to see how I would feel about it now. I'll try to rewatch it at some point this year, but I will say I wasn't a huge fan of it. And but I still thought it was an interesting, I still thought it was interesting to see how big that hit. And it was funny, this summer in particular, you had a lot of big hits, and you also had a lot of indie films that were very successful. And that was one of the things that really has always stood out about this summer in particular of 1996. Because you had Trainspotting, you had Emma. The Crow Save Angels was not a big hit, but it was still one that I think made an impression. And it certainly made an impression on me. The Frighteners came out. Now, I didn't see it until the fall, but it wasn't a hit, but it was one of those movies where if you got a chance to see it, you really were clued into something really interesting and unique about it. And Peter Jackson's film is just a lot of fun. It's probably one of the closest ones to sort of get at the sort of Ghostbusters aesthetic of comedy and special effects to do it really well. It's not the same thing as Ghostbusters, which I think is part of the reason it succeeds so well. Emma is one of the best performances Gwyneth Paltrow has ever given, and it's and it's got a really stacked cast too. I always forget just how big that cast is. Toni Collette, Ewan McGregor, Jeremy Northam, Polly Walker, Alan Cummings are just a few of the names on that movie. And it's a delight. It's a positively delightful film. Um, A Time to Kill was one of the big movies that year that and probably the most successful one and probably the most successful one in terms of John Grisham adaptations at the box office. I mean, the firm might have made more, but it was kind of the beginning of the end for Grisham films. Like none of them after that really hit that level. The Hunchback of Notre Dame is still one of the weirdest movies Disney's ever produced in terms of traditional animation. I just remember the hype about that being so insane ahead of it because of the fact that it's like, really? I mean, you think this is gonna be a big movie? I mean, I remember when the trailer played Show West and reading about how anticipated it was. It's like, really? That's not really the type of movie. And I think it is sort of one of the more forgettable Disney movies from that era. And I mean, it's funny just to think about how Disney hit its box office height with The Lion King in 1994, and that seemed to get into a serious phase because you had Pocahontas, you had The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Hercules is more of a fun one, and then you had Mulan, which has held up really well, actually. Having seen that a couple of times in the past couple of years, and then Tarzan, which I think holds up fairly well. But yeah, Hunchback of Notre Dame just really does not stand well now. And Phenomenon, the John Travolta drama, which I really liked at the time. I'm not sure how I would feel about it now. I do want to rewatch it sometime this summer and write about my feelings about it because I did like it at the time. And, it's one of those things where it's going to be interesting to see going back to some of these and seeing how they connect. John Sayles' Lone Star was another indie that did very well this summer as well. I think that it's funny because 96 and 97 in a way point to sort of the height of the absurd effects driven blockbusters, but I think there are also some really interesting in terms of the summer, but there are also some really interesting action movies there that I think hold up better than they probably should be. Because in 97 you have Face Off, you have Con Air, you have Conspiracy Theory and Air Force One. And I really continue to enjoy all of those. By 1996 you had Independence Day, Twister, The Rock, A Time to Kill, Mission Impossible. It's hard not to be impressed by that level, those particular films and how successful they were. So tonight I'm actually going to be recording a podcast for Sonic Cinema. Will probably come out later in June, depending on how my schedule works out and whether I can get one more in before that. But it will definitely come out this month, and it's going to be about parody films. And it's interesting, and I mean, I won't talk too much about it because of the fact that I want to leave a lot for the podcast that I record tonight. And that podcast is going to be with Ricky from the Crooked Table podcast. And he was actually on Binge Movies. I've followed him on Twitter, and he's a really smart podcaster and really smart about movies. I'm looking forward to this discussion with him because of the fact that parodies are such a specific genre, but it's what's really interesting, and I'm going to talk about this. We're going to talk about this a little bit because of the fact that I mentioned on Twitter, and you were, so I was like, yeah, I kind of noticed that too. If you look up parody films on Wikipedia, they list a lot of films that you wouldn't necessarily consider parody, and I think that's it's problematic in the sense of like trying to, because they include Shrek as a parody, which yes, it is kind of skewering fairy tale conventions and fairy tale. It does. I mean, I guess technically it's a parody film, but at the same time, I just have never thought of it as a parody film. It lists Pixar movies like Inside Out and Soul parody films, and it's like, first of all, neither of those films are funny enough to be considered parody comedies. Secondly, how in the world are they parodies of movies? Whoever decided the criteria for parodies on Wikipedia is kind of on crack, because as we'll discuss in the podcast, yeah, a lot of those films don't deserve to be there. The films that we are going to discuss tonight, though, we are going to talk about 3 films, each by a different filmmaker, and it's been interesting to think about the parody genre and about specific voices that have come out and the way different films go about parodying and what they're parodying. Some people parody genres, some people parody specific movies, some people parody pop culture, and each one does it differently, and each one succeeds in its own way. And it's one of the interesting things about watching this genre. It's unfortunate that the genre has really gone off a cliff in the past 20 years. I mean, but honestly, if you think about the direction that was headed, really there was no other way for it to go. Especially, but I also think part of it is because of the fact that you don't get, by and large, you don't have filmmakers with strong sensibilities and strong voices making these films anymore, and distinctive voices. And I think that's kind of one of the problems with modern parody, and I think it also boils down to the fact that people are essentially just making fun of specific things in movies or pop culture. And I mean, we see that in the third film that Ricky and I are going to be talking about tonight, which, if you've followed my story on Facebook and Instagram, you can probably tell which movies I'm talking about. But it's going to be an interesting discussion. I'm looking forward to the discussion because it's also giving me a chance to talk about movies that I never really will have thought about talking about on the podcast, except in a couple of cases with regards to my mother, whom has gone through a hard time. She's in assisted living now, as I mentioned a couple weeks ago, and some of these movies are ones that she absolutely adores, and it's something where I wouldn't have necessarily thought to talk about these outside of that context, but I'm looking forward to talking about them. As I said, this might be some of my favorite podcast prep in terms of watching movies, because the movies that we've watched are ones that I either love unreservedly, have watched often, and realize how awesome they are, or they're also movies that it's great to go back and remember just how terrific some of these movies are. And I'm looking, that's part of the reason why I'm looking forward to the discussions that we're going to have tonight. And it's going to be interesting, and I'm curious what everybody's, and you don't necessarily have to right now, but when the podcast comes out and I post it on Sonic Cinema and on YouTube. I would like to have people sort of consider what some of their favorite movie parodies are and sort of why they're good. What makes a good parody? I mean, I don't think there's a definitive answer to that because, I mean, all three of the movies that we're going to talk about tonight, I think are very funny and succeed in their own ways. And that's one of the things that makes them interesting. As part of the reason why I just can't wait to talk about this because of the fact that these are films that just you don't expect the way some of these succeed as well as they do, and it's a trip to watch them and to realize that they do succeed, and the reason they succeed is because of the fact that they managed to do something interesting with the material, and also while also being very funny as well. So I hope you watch this, and when the podcast comes out in a couple weeks, I hope you uh, keep you keep in mind some of the parodies that you really enjoy, and sort of and talk about them and why some of those parodies are your favorites. And I think that's going to be it for this episode of the Sonic Cinema podcast. I was a bit late with technical issues, but the Sonic Cinema movie chat, I should say. As far as reviews, I'm hoping to do a Almodovar film for repertory reviews this week. I do plan on having In the Heights reviewed this week. I'll probably be seeing that on HBO Max, and so that's the review. So I'll publish the review after that. As far as other movies, not sure what all I'll be able to get to. Next week, my wife and I are going to Savannah, and I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to get away. We haven't really had a vacation that has had to do with just us as opposed to family as well since our honeymoon. And so it's been a long, and it's been a bit of a trying 5 years to a large degree, but it's been a great 5 years for us, and I know we're both looking forward to that. And so I will keep you guys abreast on what is coming up with the Sonic Cinema movie chat. I hope to get back to guests. This, because of how erratic my schedule is, I haven't really wanted to try to book anybody, but hopefully that'll change in the coming months, and as things start to settle back down in terms of work and my work schedule and what that's going to look like. But thank you very much for coming aboard the Sonic Cinema movie chat tonight. I hope you enjoyed watching it. I hope it was entertaining for you, or I hope it was enlightening for you. I don't know how entertaining it could be, but I hope you enjoyed it. And thank you very much for your support at patreon.com/Sonic Cinema. If you are a patron there, at the Sonic Cinema movie podcast YouTube channel, subscribe on Apple, Google, Spotify, YouTube. And thank you for continuing to check out my work at www.sonic-cinema.com.